Welcome to Alternative Dog Moms Podcast. I'm Kimberly Gauthier, the creator of Keep the Tail Wagging. For the past 9 years, I've been blogging about raw feeding, pet wellness, and life as a crazy dog mom. I've seen massive improvements in my dog's health since I started raising my dogs naturally, and I'm passionate about sharing my experience to help other pet parents.
I'm Erin Scott. For the past 9 years, I've been researching and learning everything I can about healing cancer, allergies, autoimmune, and mystery illnesses in both my dogs and myself. And I can't wait to share with you everything I've learned on this journey. As the Alternative Dog Moms, we're bringing you all the latest dog health news that we're following and sharing the tips, tricks, and resources we learn along the way. Now, let's get started. Hello, Kimberly.
Hello, Erin. I'm so excited.
I know. I have so many questions for our guests today. We are joined by Dr. Rob Silver and by Joni Kamlet here to talk about real mushrooms. And we have questions.
Hi there.
And I guess, of course, we should start with, who you are and your background. So, Dr. Silver, if you can tell us what brought you into this space of mushrooms and
veterinary medicine.
Yeah, who does that? Who comes up with the idea of mushrooms?
Well, I've always wanted to be a vet. I just love animals, And when I graduated vet school a long time ago in 1982, I thought that I had given all the tools I would need to do battle with the diseases that our pets have. And, a couple years I was feeling pretty confident, but I started seeing more and more patients with these chronic disease problems that just kind of slipped through the cracks of Western medicine, And I started looking for answers, and I started looking at diet and homemade diets, and I started offering those. I read Dr. Pitcairn's 1982 book, which I just followed his guidelines. These days we'd say the nutrient profiles were much too carbohydrate heavy, but, they worked really well. A lot of these patients were not responding to the conventional therapies. Just put them on a simple fresh food diet, cooked even, not raw or anything. And they showed remarkable response. From there, I started looking at herbs because I've always been into backpacking and identifying plants that I might be able to eat or survive on. And in vet school, they taught us about poisonous plants. So the next logical place would be, since we know the difference between a drug and a poisonous dosage, is to go into the medicinal plants. So I learned how to identify them, collect them, make medicines. And then from there, I got my acupuncture training and kept going and going and going. And here I am,
That's just so much. Wow.
Thank you.
And Joni, what brought you to us?
Yeah. So I had a little bit of a different path. I was living in an ashram in 1996 at a yoga ashram and was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And I had my right ovary removed, and they wanted to go back in and do a complete hysterectomy, stage me from my diaphragm down to my bowel and do chemo and radiation, and something inside me. And I was like, I knew nothing about integrative medicine at all for myself or for animals. And something in me just said no. At the same time, my dog had mammary cancer. And so I knew I didn't want to go that route, but I didn't know what to do next. And I just started reading and learning everything, for myself, but also the things that I was doing for myself, I started doing for my dog. And here I am, over 25 years later, and I still have an ovary. I don't have ovarian cancer, and my dog with mammary cancer, she lived another 9 years or so.
Oh, wow.
I found homeopathy with her. So that was the first thing I did with her. And based on that, I went back to school to become a veterinary nurse, an RVT, and then went on to become a certified canine rehabilitation practitioner. And then I went to work for Standard Process for a decade, teaching vets about nutrition and herbs and whole food for animals. And then I became obsessed with mushrooms. So, which is the best.
Mushrooms have just gotten such a great, I want to say resurgence, because it's not like they've been around for a long time. It's just that a lot of people only think about psychedelic mushrooms and then the poisonous mushrooms that are in our yard. And often, I will post something about mushrooms or reshare. I actually recently, I'm going through my blog and rewriting old content and making it more detailed. So I just finished like this epic post about medicinal mushrooms. And for once, I didn't get you shouldn't be feeding mushrooms to your dogs, or I thought mushrooms were poisonous for your dogs. What's interesting about the myths around mushrooms is there are people who actually think that mushrooms at the grocery store are toxic to dogs. And it's interesting because I don't know how this information gets out there and twisted, but I was wondering, can you explain, Dr. Silver, the difference between like the edible mushrooms that we're buying at the grocery stores, the mushrooms that may be growing in our backyard, and then the mushrooms that are used medicinally that people forage for?
So I just have to jump in real quick, Kimberly, and say I had the same question on my list because anytime I see something about mushrooms for pets, people start saying like, you can't give drugs to your dogs. And I'm like, oh my God, there's like 8,000, I don't even know, different types of mushrooms. Why is it that that's where people's minds go? So that's so funny. So yes.
There definitely is a stigma around mushrooms. Has been. And in fact, there's a stigma around CBD. Every time you mention CBD, people think you're talking about THC, that you're talking about going to get the dog high. With mushrooms, a lot of the information, the erroneous information, slightly erroneous, comes from veterinarians because their only experience with dogs on mushrooms are the dogs that go into the backyard and forage for some wild mushrooms, which may very well be toxic or poisonous. And so that's their experience. So their admonition, because it's a lot easier to just say, don't ever eat a mushroom. That's, you can have these, but you can't have these. It gets too complicated. And there's a whole culture of what we call mycophobes, which are people that have been brought up in their own cultures, which are very scared of eating mushrooms. And at the same time, there's a whole culture of mycophiles, like Asian and Eastern European, where mushrooms are an integral part of their culture, their cuisine, and their medicine. So that's really where it has all come from. And then, as we're seeing now in the public space, it's a great opportunity for people to spout off whatever they want to. So people will give their opinions that aren't scientifically based, and then other people read those opinions and are influenced by them. So that's one reason why my work with real mushrooms is really important, because I really feel it's crucial to get the good, credible, objective information out there so people can make the right decisions for their own pets.
Yeah, and if I can add to that some really cool, fun facts about mushrooms. I mean, there's not just thousands. I mean, they're in the millions, first of all. And we've only identified maybe 2% of the mushrooms out there. And of those, how many are we actually eating or using medicinally? I mean, we've only touched the tip of the iceberg. But one of the interesting things about mushrooms is that a mushroom can be edible. So it can be a culinary mushroom that's also medicinal. It can be, mushrooms are like edible, medicinal, psychedelic, or poisonous. But there are some mushrooms that can be all four of those. The Amanita muscaria, the red and white Christmas mushroom that you see often, in a lot of advertising, that's a mushroom that you can eat it, and it has some therapeutic value, but it will also cause you to have a psychedelic experience. But if you cook it the wrong way, it can kill you. So there's a mushroom that's in all four of those categories. The general rule of thumb is that if a mushroom is safe for a human, it's safe for a dog or a cat. So the mushrooms you buy in the grocery store are generally safe for pets. Would you agree, Dr. Silver?
Although an important caveat is that mushrooms need to be cooked. Some raw mushrooms, even those little button mushrooms you see at the supermarket, have a toxic principle in them that is removed from cooking. It's a very small toxic principle. I mean, if you're on a salad bar and you're picking up some, sliced mushrooms to put on your salad, it's not an issue. You have to eat a whole lot. But nonetheless, you can't get the medicinal benefits of mushrooms without cooking them as well. So right. we highly recommend cooking the mushrooms if you're gathering.
Can you overcook and cook out the medicinal benefit?
You'd have to really cook them pretty hot for pretty long. But I did, in fact, just read a study this morning where they talked about destroying some of the polysaccharides in a mushroom compound that was heated at extreme temperatures, like 400 degrees or higher. So I think, around 350 degrees is a decent temperature to use if you're cooking them. Slice them up and saute them, 15 minutes minimum, a little longer if you can. Personally, what I do when I fix mushrooms for myself or for my critters is I will dice them up really small, which enables them to get cooked through much better and also enables them to be better digested when you eat them. Dogs particularly don't really chew their food. That's why we say they wolf things down. But, same with many humans as well. And so this kind of speeds up the process. And I think dicing them actually spreads that lovely mushroom taste throughout the dish as well.
Putting them in bone broth is another great way to add them to the diet for pets because, then you're just slow cooking them along with all that other wonderful stuff. And the mushrooms are just going to add an added medicinal quality to the bone broth.
Yeah. I'm actually on a bone broth. I've been doing it since Thursday because I got 120 pounds of beef ribs.
Oh my God.
And I don't have enough room in my freezer for 120 pounds of beef ribs. So I'm just making bone broth. And I'm so tired of making bone broth. And so that is such a great idea because I started with just bone broth, but then I started adding turmeric to it. So it's like, okay, I'll make some batches with turmeric. So now it's like great reminder. I'll add some mushroom to the final batches just to have some variety in my freezer.
Yeah, I like to add shiitake. It's really nice to add to bone broth. Mm-hmm. And it's just, you can always find shiitake at the grocery store. Well, almost always.
I'll bet your house smells pretty nice, Kimberly. Mm-hmm.
Hey, quick question for you. Are you someone who wants to be fit, healthy, and happy? And what if I told you could get your dream body by simply just listening to a podcast? I'm Josh.
And I'm KG, and we are the hosts of the Fit, Healthy, and Happy podcast.
Listen, we get it. Fitness isn't easy. Carbs, no carbs.
Just stop, okay? It doesn't have to be that complicated. And that's why we made this podcast. We get straight to the facts so you can become your best you.
So the way to check us out is click the link in the show notes or search Fit, Healthy, and Happy podcast on any of the major podcast platforms. We'll see you soon.
No, Johan makes me do it on the porch. He can't stand the smell.
Okay.
It doesn't bother me. I usually do it when he goes out of town. But this time it's like, no, this is going to happen. So it's sitting out there in a pressure cooker. And I have, I think, 2 or 3 more batches to go. So I should be done by tomorrow.
Wow.
Wow. That's a lot of cooking.
Yeah, it is. I mean, thank heavens for pressure cookers. I mean, if it were a slow cooker, it'd probably take me weeks to finish.
Yeah. That's right.
So one thing that I've noticed is that, okay, so we have supplements in powder form, in tincture form. Some of the tinctures are just very, like I have one for myself, very much I don't know what you call it, but it's processed through alcohol. And the ones for my dogs aren't. They don't taste like alcohol, at least. I taste everything that my dogs get. And I'm curious if you can tell us like the difference between each process and what's better or if that even matters.
Me and Dr. Silver are looking at each other. We've just been discussing this earlier today. Yeah. And Doc Rob, I'd love to hear your take on this.
Well, actually, this is a continuation of the conversation regarding cooking mushrooms.
Yes.
And the reason why we have to cook mushrooms, and the reason why there's a specific extraction process with mushrooms, which is what the result would be, whether it's a liquid or it's a powder or it's an alcoholic liquid, has to do with the fact that the cell wall of the fungus, of the mushroom, is made up of some very strong structural components. One's called chitin. Maybe you're familiar with chitin. It makes up the hard exoskeleton of insects and crustaceans like crabs and lobsters, and is a precursor for glucosamine, actually. And then the other non-digestible, very fibrous element are called beta-glucans. And beta-glucans interface with our immune system to wake it up and make it more active and more effective. So so you have to heat that in a hot water bath at about 90 degrees centigrade, just below boiling for about 2 hours in order to break down those fibrous cell walls in order to release the inside of the fungal cell, which contains other active ingredients, including ingredients we call terpenes or triterpenes. And if you're familiar with cannabis at all, terpenes are really big with cannabis because they're what give it smell. If you squeeze a lemon and you smell that lemon smell, that's a terpene. Essential oils are made up of terpenes. They're very active, very biologically active. They cross the blood-brain barrier. And there's a lot of terpenes in mushrooms, which are hugely important and hugely effective. So with the terpenes in the mushrooms are larger molecules. So when we heat them like that, we will get a lot of terpenes along with our beta-glucans extracted. But some mushrooms, like the reishi mushroom, which perhaps you're familiar with, the Ganoderma, has a super, super high levels of triterpenes. So does the turkey tail as well. And so some companies will do what they call a dual extraction, which means they first extract the fat-soluble components, which are the triterpenes, from the mushroom cell, because the alcohol can go through the cell wall and leach out those fat-soluble components. And that's where you get your alcohol liquid. And those are rich in the triterpenes, but not so rich in the beta-glucans. The beta-glucans then we then extract through that hot water extraction. And so the combination of the two gives you a dual extraction. You take the terpenes from the alcohol and the beta-glucans from the water, and you blend them back together. The problem is that beta-glucans don't concentrate very well within water because of their molecular size. They form almost like a colloid, like a granular kind of a sediment that can be in there. So the liquids, the liquids that are made from water, the water extract, don't have a very high beta-glucan content. That means you need to take more of them to get the same effect. The dried powders, now there's dried powders where they just take that dried mushroom and they grind it up and that's powder. That's not the same as extracting. You take that ground up powder and then you subject that to the hot water extraction. So when we're talking about real mushrooms, which really has set the global standards for mushroom extraction, we do for all of our mushrooms we do a hot water extract, and for the reishi, which has such high levels of triterpenes, we do a dual extraction. We get very good levels of triterpenes from the turkey tail. So our powders, which are dried powders, actually are very rich in beta-glucans. In fact, so rich that we're able to measure the beta-glucan content and guarantee to the consumer, human or animal, the potency from one capsule to the next, from one scoop to the next, from one bottle or pouch to the next. And that allows the consumer or the veterinarian who might be recommending it to be able to dose it to the animal based on their weight, but also based on their condition using the beta-glucan content. So does that help a little bit?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, good. Yeah, and it's confusing because, because mushrooms have gotten to be so popular, and because we know that our social media and our internet and everything, it's out there to give us information, but a lot of that information is directed towards selling things, and sometimes the information used to sell things isn't always as accurate as you'd like it to be. So I hope trying to be a voice of clarity, objectivity, of objective studies in order to help clear the air so everyone can come from the same position of knowledge so they can best help their pets themselves or with the help of a veterinarian.
Yeah, one of the things that I was asking Dr. Silver earlier today is because I was looking, I look at the different tinctures online and, I'm trying to determine the difference between the powders that we use and the tinctures in the marketplace. I get a lot of questions about it. And I know some of these companies are mentioning that the tinctures are more bioavailable. Mm-hmm. So I was asking Dr. Silver about that, and he gave me a very interesting, I thought that might be helpful to share that, what you share with me.
Beta-glucans are really interesting because they're these large polysaccharides that aren't digestible. Polysaccharide means it's a chain of sugar molecules. But because fungal organisms have always been the worst as far as disease creating, that early on in the evolution of animal cells and fungal cells, and actually one fact about fungi that's really interesting is that animals and fungi both evolved from the same single-celled organism, and we share about 30% of our DNA with mushrooms. So this is maybe one reason why fungal pathogens are so toxic, but this is another reason why mushrooms can be so powerful in improving our health. So what's happened is the beta glucans don't have any function in the body. They are recognized by our immune cells as belonging to a fungus. And our immune cells are still way back when, millennia ago, they say, oh, looks like a fungus, let's mount some kind of response. And that's what the value is between the mushrooms, is these non-digestible beta glucans that are structural actually signal animal immune systems so they can work better. And it's amazing because we know that the improvement of the immune system can actually fight cancer to the extent that some can wind up going into remission for certain cancers with the appropriate mushrooms and the appropriate dosages. And Erin, you have an experience there?
Yes, I'm actually a breast cancer survivor, and I did do the conventional treatment, but I did a lot of additional treatment. I worked with a naturopathic oncologist as well. And so one of the things I did was mistletoe, but the other one I did was is it maitake?
Maitake, yeah.
And I remember she said that that's one of the only things, if I'm remembering this correctly, that can increase the NK natural killer cells in your body. She said that and forest bathing, where you kind of go out, into the woods. And so those were both part of my treatment as well.
Oh.
Nice. Yeah, it's mushrooms should be are a very important part of every program, especially with cancer. And there was a study that was published in 2012, which I think is really what woke the pet world up about the value of mushrooms. And awakened the pet world. That's a better word. And that was in 2012 at the University of Pennsylvania. It was a study about hemangiosarcoma, splenic cancer in the dog, which is extremely terminal, extremely toxic, extremely awful, when you get that diagnosis. And they found that by using an extract of the turkey tail mushroom, they were able to get better survival times. And we're still talking survival times and not cures when it comes to this cancer, but they got better survival times with the extract of the turkey tail mushroom than they did from historical controls where they used chemotherapy. So that got everyone's attention. And that really, I think, started this uptick of interest by the pet parent, in the use of mushrooms, because cancer is so huge. It's huge in our people as well. I mean, even within the four of us, we have quite a representation of that cancer incidence. So, anything that we can find that's going to help. And the earlier we can intervene with it before the diagnosis for cancer, before they even get cancer, this is when we should be starting the mushrooms, way back when, early in life. My first black lab, I called him Bean, and I had to pay the breeder not to vaccinate him. And I couldn't stand what he was feeding him. The first meal when he came home, I actually had Ganoderma, and I cooked up Ganoderma with black beans, and some rice. At that time, I was still pretty carbohydrate heavy in my nutrient profiles. But Bean, from the very beginning, got the mushrooms. And we know in puppies, for instance, that may have immune compromise, that if they take mushrooms, they're much more likely to mount a long-term response of protection from the vaccinations. No one wants to vaccinate as much as vets recommend, but we want to do it. We don't want our animals to catch these terrible diseases that are preventable either. And so if we can improve the duration of immunity of a vaccination without having to repeat that vaccination by giving something simple like mushrooms, that's a real plus.
Yeah. There's actually a veterinary clinical study about vaccine titers increasing with mushrooms. Yeah. One of the very few veterinary studies on mushrooms.
I'm going to track that down.
Yeah.
Eastern Europe. So, where mushrooms are part of their culture. And it was about an extract of the oyster mushroom, which is one of my favorite, tastiest mushrooms out there.
Yeah.
It's funny. Oyster mushrooms is part of my dog's diet.
Oh, cool.
We have 4 dogs now. We lost a dog in 2020 to hemangiosarcoma. I was basically sent home to say goodbye, but she stuck around for 5 weeks. Wow. And I lost a dog last summer to lymphoma, and he was with us for more than a year and a half after his diagnosis. And I know a lot has to do with, what I feed my dogs and just the choices that I made for my dogs. I use both traditional and holistic medicine.
Good.
But we fostered a dog after Thanksgiving. I work for a rescue as well, a volunteer. Mm-hmm. And I went to a rescue event and this little puppy came and crawled into my lap. And I sat there with the puppy for a while and was just like, I'm going to go ahead and just take this one home.
Smart puppy knew whose lap to crawl into.
and I fully intended on fostering, but my partner, he recognized that we were going to keep this puppy before I did. And so she's over there crawling into her little bed. But one thing that I wanted to do with her was, like with Scout, who passed last year, and his sister is still with us, Zoe, we got them at 6 weeks of age. So with them, which was different than Rodrigo and his sibling, Sydney, who passed in 2020, Rodrigo started on fresh food in 2013, so 10 years ago. And he was 3 years old, and he's still with us today. He's doing well. And the one thing that I think is the reason why he's doing so well, despite the fact that his vet said that he would pass, was all the work I did on his gut health. And I didn't do it because I understood I didn't even know the word microbiome. I didn't know the connection between gut health and the immune system. I didn't know anything. I thought 80-10-10 was a balanced diet. I didn't know anything, but I just knew that my dog had diarrhea all the time. And so I figure I needed to do something to stop. And so I was just working on his gut health for years, trying to find the connection between, his diet and stopping the diarrhea. And that's, I think, is the reason why he's still with us. With Scout and Zoe, I started them on raw at 6 weeks of age. The second they came home, they started on a raw food diet, and I fed them that way all their lives. And so I think that's why Zoe's still with us and doing so well. And people are shocked that she's 9 years old and how Scout survived so long after his cancer diagnosis. So now brings us to Bella, who's now 8 months old. The day, probably like the first few days that she was with us, I pulled out CBD oil to give it to my dogs. And she immediately came and sat down and opened her mouth as if she knew. And this is, this is coming from the rescue world. People aren't really, I'm sure some rescue out there is doing CBD oil, but not ours. And so she gets CBD oil on a daily basis. I called a friend who really is well versed in CBD oil to find out how much to give to her, but she gets that on a daily basis. They also all get mushrooms in their diet 5 days a week. And I alternate different types of mushrooms. Mm-hmm. And I'm so curious, after all of these years and just seeing all the different things that I've learned and done with dogs, how she's going to be, because she's vaccinated. And my whole thing was that I do want her to be vaccinated. I do want her to be safe, but I also want to protect her system and not have any of the side effects that can cause. And gosh, it's just so exciting just to talk to you guys today, because this is giving me so much hope to, that not so much that we'll somehow crack the code and we'll have dogs that live forever, but I feel like with each dog that we get, we're closer and closer to having dogs that live 18 to 20 to 25 years old. And I would love to see a day where that's the norm again.
Yeah, absolutely. Kudos to you, Kimberly, for, you mentioned that balanced approach. I mean, that truly is integrative medicine. When you're combining, it's not one or the other, or this is what I've learned after being, 25 plus years being in the integrative community, is that, it's just a big toolbox where you work with what's going to work best for your pet. And for instance, my dog, I'm in Virginia. I tried not to give her tick medication, and she ended up in the hospital with a reaction to seed ticks. It's like, you've got to weigh.
Yeah.
You've got to weigh the pros and cons. Yes.
Well, and I think that's so important, because we also, Dr. Rob, you mentioned, with social media, people are getting the bulk of their information from social media. And we've reached a point where people don't trust veterinarians, because that's a constant message that some people are putting out, that you can't trust veterinarians. So they're trusting strangers on social media platforms with what they need to do with their dogs. And I can't tell you how many times people are, quote unquote, disappointed that I can't believe you vaccinated your dogs, or I can't believe you give your dog pain medication. I can't believe. And I'm just sort of like, why wouldn't I? I had a friend call me. She's in Florida, hysterical, because her dog was in pain. She needed to go to the vet, but she knew that if she went to the vet, her vet was going to either put her dog on some type of steroid or put her dog on some type of medication. And I was just like, why wouldn't you want your dog not to be in pain? And, and it just never even occurred to her that, no. What you want is give your dog some relief. That doesn't mean you're done. Yeah. You use that break to figure out what you can do long term, but you want to give your dog that relief. I mean, I feel like what we do, and that's why there's so much pushback, is we've turned traditional medicine, so the prescription medicine, into a cure, rather than this is supposed, like when I take Advil, I'm not taking it every single day. I take it because I'm not feeling, my arm is hurting. I try to stretch it out. I try to rest it. It's still hurting. I'm going to take this to get some relief. And then I'm going to do what I need to do to make sure I feel better. But it doesn't mean I have to do it forever, thankfully. And I feel like we've forgotten that there is a space for both traditional and holistic.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. Like, I feel really passionate about this because I was just on social media earlier today, and somebody whose dog clearly needed to be on antibiotics and had been prescribed it. And she was so traumatized by what she was reading about antibiotics on all these social media posts, and people telling her she was going to cause so much damage to her dog by giving this one dose of the antibiotic. And there's got to be a balance there. Sometimes you got to do what's just going to help that dog in that moment. And then you can fix what the antibiotics did.
Yeah.
Conventional medicine, I think that's a short-term solution. And many times you need that short-term solution. You don't want them to feel pain. You don't want them to suffer. I understand people have these attitudes about drugs. A lot of them have been formed through, opinion leaders, on social media who, when you are negative about something, you tell something about the risks, it gets people's attention. That's a very strong way to get people's attention. But I think holistic medicine is the long-term solution, but you need to blend them two together and use the best of each of them for that pet at that moment, in its condition. And I think a lot of that advice, it's dangerous. It's harmful to the pets. People think that they're doing something good, but it's not. It's harmful. And as a veterinarian who has been in practice for nearly 40 years, I've rarely seen adverse effects from pharmaceuticals. And usually we can mitigate those side effects very easily. Antibiotics, probiotics, and take them before, take them during, take them after, and stay on them, stuff like that. So that's really where the value is of an integrative vet. And many veterinarians out there are burned out. I think the veterinary industry has really spoiled it for themselves. And that's one reason why people don't trust the vets. And the integrative vets that I know, they choose integrative medicine to escape the burnout, because vets get burnout from that kind of conventional practice. I mean, we have the highest suicide rate of any profession because of that, even higher than dentists.
And the dentists.
Which is so funny, the dentist. This is so random.
I just think it's really important that.
I love what you guys are saying, because it is one of those things where when Scout was diagnosed with lymphoma, his oncologist, we talked about his diet and everything. And one of the things that she wanted me to do is to take him off of a raw diet and to feed him a diet of cooked, because he was going to be going through chemotherapy. And I just said, okay. And I don't have a poker face, but this was during COVID. So I was sitting out in the car talking to her on the phone. So she didn't see my lies, but she heard them. But, a year and a half later, not even a year and a half later, like probably 6 months later, she told me she had gone on a vacation. And she said out of all of the dogs she was treating, and she was treating many, mine was the only one that went right into remission and stayed there. And he stayed there straight through the first round of chemo and then 4 to 5 months beyond, which is something she had never seen. Yeah. And just that experience, it may not have changed her mind, about what I was doing the holistic, because she knew I told her everything because I wanted to be very upfront just in case something that I was doing would interrupt what she wanted to do. So I wanted to be very frank, but I feel like if we could have these conversations, we change minds one person at a time.
Yeah.
And she was very open to talking to me. And when you were mentioning antibiotics years ago, Scout was on around antibiotics. We tried to figure out what was going to go on. And it was kind of sweet because the veterinarian came in and was like, I'm going to have to prescribe. I think that the antibiotics is the best, as if I'm just going to melt down.
Right. Yeah.
Kill my dog. And I was just like, okay,
yeah.
What can we do to protect his gut health?
Yeah.
And we had this fantastic conversation about what we can do, how long. And she said the same thing of put him on, and we were going to basically antibiotics in the morning, probiotics in the evening, and then to continue the probiotics for another couple weeks after we finished the antibiotics so we could start rebuilding. I was stunned to be in a very traditional chain hospital situation having this type of conversation with a veterinarian. And it was exhilarating.
Yeah. That's fantastic. And, as you're talking, Kimberly and Dr. Silver and Erin, I'm thinking of, it's almost like we have a responsibility, those of us that have been in the integrative pet space for a long time, and that are also doing social media and things like that, to be more out with the fact that we do, use, whether we're using a tick medicine or whether we had to use that antibiotic or whatever, like we need to normalize doing these things. And it's not all we're doing. We're doing it as a one-time thing. Yeah. The rest of the time, I'm raw feeding, I'm supplementing. I'm always going to choose the more natural approach until I can't, until it's clear that there's something else that's needed. And then I'll readily do that. And then mitigate it with, once my dog's better, make sure we get back in balance. But I think we do have a responsibility to be talking about these things more. Yeah. So thanks.
So with the mushrooms, we've mentioned so many different types, reishi, and how do we know which ones to use for which conditions? With the real mushrooms, I know there's like the 5 defenders. So can you tell us about like the different types that are available and what the benefits are?
So all mushrooms are very similar in terms of them having the beta glucans, which have that immune modulating property. Some have more, some have less, some have different ones and different combinations. For instance, turkey tail has the highest number of beta glucans and triterpenes of any of the mushrooms, which is one reason why historically it is usually chosen to treat cancer. Other mushrooms, like let's say lion's mane, which is really the most popular mushroom in America today because of its influence on memory and dementia and stress, has triterpenes in it. These triterpenes I'm talking about that can help calm and settle the patient, settle the individual. Cordyceps has these cordycepins in it, which help to regulate energy in the body and also kind of give a little bit of a mental calm. Reishi is used by Zen masters. I mean, each mushroom has its special sauce, has its special powers. So we know that when you put together several mushrooms at the same time, we see a synergy between them. This is one reason why the founders of the company came up with the 5 defenders, which has reishi in it, and turkey tail, and maitake, and shiitake, and chaga, all of which have been identified as being very potent against cancer and very potent as immune system modulators. In fact, we're seeing benefits for this formula even for seasonal allergies, because reishi and chaga have triterpenes in them, which have antihistaminic properties, plus their beta glucans help to regulate immune function, because we know with allergies, immune function's a little off. It's a little bit too reactive. So you could make a decision as far as choosing a mushroom or two because of these special properties they have to match the needs of your animal. Or you could look to use more of a multiple mushroom blend. The only problem with multiple mushroom blends, especially when they get to be higher than 5 or maybe 7 mushrooms, is you don't get enough of any one single mushroom to have enough of an impact unless you give an awful lot of that. So that's the only caution, but that's still not a big deal. So that's a big piece of what Joni and I are doing. Is we're creating a lot of educational material. We're on with these podcasts to help people understand more about mushrooms. I'm speaking widely around the country. Joni is as well. I'm speaking in vet things. Joni's speaking in pet parent things, just to educate the community about the value of mushrooms so that they will avail themselves of it as they need it for their critters.
And I do want to add, one of the most challenging things about picking a mushroom is they all have similar things in common. All mushrooms are immune modulating. All of the therapeutic mushrooms anyway, they're all anti-cancer, anti-neoplastic. They're all anti-inflammatory. So, no matter which mushroom you pick, you're going to be getting those benefits. Like Doc Rob was saying, the lion's mane, which is my favorite, any older dog, I would put that on. It's great for canine cognitive dysfunction, excellent for anything neurologic, for degenerative myelopathy. If I had a dog with DM, I'd definitely have them on lion's mane. Cordyceps, what Doc Rob mentioned, the cordyceps, it's an adaptogen. It's also potentially really good for cats because it has an affinity for the kidneys and it has a really nice kind of mild, Rob thinks it tastes like a bit like toast. But, so cordyceps so all mushrooms have things in common, but there are certain standouts. Lion's mane, one of them. Cordyceps is another one. Reishi, which is excellent for calming. Like Doc Rob was saying, it was used by Zen monks for thousands of years to support meditation. So it's great to help with sleep or behavior issues in dogs. So, but you're going to hit the target no matter which mushroom you pick.
So we can't pick the wrong one, it sounds like.
You really can't. You might get a little more of a bullseye, by picking something like specific, but unfortunately there's very few veterinary clinical studies. And so we have to go mainly on anecdotal feedback. And, sometimes that's all you can go off of.
Hey, it's a start.
Yeah, it's a start.
It's funny when people, kind of turn their nose up at anecdotal evidence. And it's like, doesn't everything start with anecdotal evidence? I mean, something happened and people look at it, then it happens again and again. And that's what inspires us to start digging deep. It's, the science sort of follows the anecdotes.
Yeah, exactly. So every time somebody leaves a review on the Real Mushroom site, my phone pings. And so all day I'm reading human and pet, reviews. And, Doc Rob and I also we do these live Q&As every month, and people are always asking about mushrooms for pain. And we don't, we usually recommend other things and mushroom as a supplement because there's not really an anti-pain mushroom, like things like boswellia, glucosamine, and other things. Bone broth might be more helpful. You can add mushrooms. And then I get all these reviews saying, I started the 5 defenders and my dog is moving better and they seem less painful and this and that. And so I just throw my hands up and I'm like, okay, they can just do everything, Like,
is it inflammation? Is it that it's bringing down inflammation?
Yeah, it could be, it could just be the anti-inflammatory qualities. And these, pet parents are seeing changes in their dog's movement. Their dog seemed less painful. But I hear it, over and over again. And it's like, okay, all these people can't be just imagining it. There must be something there.
So one word that's newer to me is this word mycelium. Am I saying that right?
Yes.
And so my very layperson understanding is that kind of where the mushrooms are grown or like the environment of the mushrooms. Am I? No, not at all. Can you tell us about mycelium and in my mind, it's tied to the sourcing of mushrooms, I guess.
Well, it very much is. And mycelium very much speaks to the quality of the product as well. The mushroom, the fungus, has a complex life cycle. And it starts with spores, which are like their sperm and ova, which are just one single set of chromosomes. And they're released by the cap of the mushroom. And when they germinate, they form these little thin tubes. The thin tubes, if they're compatible, will merge and merge and merge and form this knotted nest of all these threads that we call mycelium. And the mycelium lives in whatever the material is that it's growing in, and it creates these digestive enzymes that eat into the material that it's growing in to create nutrients that it then feeds itself with those nutrients and supports its growth. Over time, environmental conditions change. Maybe it gets a little wetter, a little drier, temperatures lower, and the mycelium says, time to reproduce. So it organizes itself into a mushroom. And the mushroom is actually organized mycelium. And so it then creates the mushroom, which then comes up like with the standard appearance of a mushroom, the stalk and cap, although mushrooms have many different shapes. And within that cap, in the gills or with the pores or like the lion's mane with the teeth, that's where the spores are produced. So they then release the spores and the cycle continues. So for mushroom cultivation, you need to take the mycelium, which typically they grow the mycelium on grain, which is a very easy material to grow mycelium on. And the mycelium will grow all the way through the grain, although it doesn't completely digest it. And you have this kind of white material. If you're familiar with a food called tempeh, for instance, tempeh is soybeans that are myceliated it's a fungus, but not a mushroom fungus. Same thing with the grain. So we then take that myceliated grain that we call spawn. I know this is a long answer, but take the spawn, and then we put that in the appropriate substrate, which for most mushrooms is dead or dying wood. For some mushrooms, it's leaf litter, compost, or manure. And then on that appropriate substrate, what normally it grows on naturally in the wild, it then grows into it, and then the mushrooms come up. Oftentimes, this can take up to 6 months to harvest. So it's very time intensive. It's very labor intensive. It takes a lot of tending to these mushrooms as they're growing to keep temperature and moisture and everything, intact. Well, there are some companies now which are skipping that step of going to the appropriate substrate. They take the mycelium that's grown on the grain and they dry it and they powder it, and they're selling it as mushroom, or they may be truthful about it and calling it mycelium biomass, which basically means mycelium grown on grain. Now, we don't like the fact that they're kind of being a little deceptive of the consumer in terms of calling it a mushroom when it really isn't, when the consumer maybe has a dog with hemangiosarcoma like Kimberly, wants to get a mushroom that's going to work, instead gets grain. And when we analyze for beta-glucans in the mycelium on grain versus beta-glucans in the mushroom, they're only about 10% of the total beta-glucan content. Typically, we'll see 25 to 50% beta-glucans in the mushroom. In this mycelium on grain, we're seeing anywhere from maybe 1 to 2% beta-glucans, maybe to as much as 5%, 10% in some of them. So it's not as potent either. And so that's where the mycelium comes in. But there are some proponents of fungal medicine, I won't say mushroom medicine, that promote mycelium as being as powerful as mushrooms. And it's really not. If you know about the word prebiotic and you know about the word probiotic, then maybe you also have heard the word postbiotic. And a postbiotic is basically all the fermentation byproducts that are left in that mass. So that's what I think mycelium on grain is. It's a postbiotic, and it does have some immune modulating properties. It just doesn't have the same specs as the mushrooms do. If I had cancer, I would choose a mushroom, not mycelium growing on grain. And so many pet parents feed their pets grain-free diets. They don't want to get into grain. So it's important that the consumer understands the difference and looks to the label to explain to them how they can tell the difference.
Is this why it's called real mushrooms?
That's why we call ourselves real mushrooms, because we use none of that myceliated grain product. We only use the actual mushroom.
So one thing that I've noticed, and I don't know if you can hear my dog drinking. I have 2 dogs that drink very, very loudly.
I hear it.
That's Bella. So she's thirsty. But yes, good girl. I've noticed that there are a lot of people selling mushroom tinctures on Etsy.
Oh.
And that's, a big thing. I mean, and, it's kind of cool because it's like, you're supporting small businesses. But to be perfectly honest, I don't know who these people are. I don't know
what are you getting?
Yeah, I have no idea. I'm just trusting that what they say is in the bottle that I'm buying is what's in the bottle. And I was just wondering, when it comes to trying to determine whether a product is good, I feel like whenever something becomes popular, we saw it with essential oils, we saw it with turmeric,
CBD.
All of a sudden, I actually had a conversation with a friend of mine years ago where she was grocery shopping and she called me and was like, do you like lavender essential oil? And I was just like, yeah. And then, and I was like, why? And she was like, well, I'm at the grocery store. And I'm like, no. No, that is not where you buy your essential oils. It's at the grocery store. So with the popularity of mushrooms, people will reach for something that they think is a good product. It's easy to create a very fancy, beautiful website. How does someone determine whether or not a product is actually a good product?
I recommend the same thing that I recommend for people who are trying to find a good CBD product, to call the manufacturer and ask them, how is your product grown? Can you provide us with a certificate of analysis? It's a laboratory analysis from a third-party lab that would tell you what the beta-glucan content is, because you would need to know that if you want to use my dosing algorithm for that, and see what they say. And if they give you all kinds of wishy-washy, language, oh, we don't really need to do that. We don't blah, 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 this or that. We're wildcrafted, this or that. That's a sign that maybe they're not being truthful with you. And then look to the label. If the label says mycelium on it, then that tells you what it is. It tells you now mycelium is a very powerful part of the mushroom, of the fungal life cycle. And some of the most powerful mushroom medicines that are made, for instance, the turkey tail extract that I was describing that was in that study for hemangiosarcoma, actually comes from the mycelium, but the mycelium is grown in a liquid culture, not on grain. So they can separate the liquid from the mycelium, and then they process it to extract the beta-glucans. As compared to mycelium, it's just grown on grain and dried, no extraction is being done at all. So, so the label can give guidance as well. I recently did a study that is being published in a veterinary magazine, in which we chose 10 products at random off the internet that said they were for pets that had turkey tail in them. And we blinded the labels. We taped them up, put numbers on them, sent them off to a third-party lab who analyzed them for us by the number. And then I put that together into a table, and we measured beta-glucan content versus starch. If it was coming from grain, you would think it would have a high starch. If it was coming from a mushroom, it would have a low starch and a high beta-glucan. So it was very clear, out of those 10 products, there were only 4 products that were clearly indicative that they were mushrooms. Now, some of them did give label transparencies. I give them credit for that. They did say this is, mycelial biomass, organic oats, organic rice, organic whatever. So that's good. That way, the consumer may decide to choose that product based on something they've read or heard, but at least they know what they're getting. And that's the important part, is the consumer needs to know.
But some of them didn't. Some of the labels did not say that, which is what's so deceptive.
Do you identify what the brands are in the article?
We know I do.
There's some popular brands though.
One used a lot by veterinarians for cancer, by the way. Which
yeah.
But we didn't want to create this whole competitive thing. What we really would like to do is partner up with the other mushroom companies and establish some standards for the consumer as far as labeling, language, blah 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 blah. That needs to be done. And if we piss them off, by this study, then we're not going to get into that conversation. So.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Another thing I wanted to mention, because there are so many questions like this, I'm actually in the middle of writing a blog, The Beginner's Guide to Picking a Quality Mushroom Supplement, where I'm going to be, just not not at the level that Dr. Silver, because he's brilliant and, not the scientific level that he does it, more of a kind of a pet parent beginner's guide to what to look for, the third-party testing, make sure you're getting an extract, what the difference is between a tincture and a powder, why you might want this, when will a chew come in handy, different things to look for.
Yeah, I'm on your website too, and I saw the chews, and so that's in my shopping cart. I love that idea because my dogs don't know; they think it's a treat, and so it's just like it's such an easy way to give it to them.
They're our most popular product in the pet line is the Immune and the Relaxed Chews that Dr. Silver formulated for us. Yeah,
one of them is out of stock.
Yes. We're having bottle issues, supply chain issues with the jar. Yeah, it'll be back soon.
One other thing that I hear just about sourcing of mushrooms is like some people get very weird about anything coming from China. And so I wanted to make sure that we talked about that.
Good. That's important because our mushrooms are cultivated in China. China cultivates 85% of the world's medicinal mushrooms and edible mushrooms. We grow them in the highlands in China. In fact, real mushrooms started organic cultivation in China. They had the first organic mushroom growers conference ever in China, was started by the founder of Real Mushrooms. So all of our mushrooms are grown under USDA certified organic standards. They're all tested for pesticides and heavy metals and everything else that you can imagine, because we want to make sure that our product is a clean product. And we understand the issues with China as far as the quality of products, the pet food recall of 2007, the geopolitical stuff we're seeing right now. China's not a favored place, but that's where the mushrooms come from, and they are very high quality. And we're able to provide such high quality mushrooms at a very reasonable cost. Yeah. Our products are very reasonably priced. They're priced for life.
This is what I do when we interview anyone. I just fill up a shopping cart. What I have in my shopping cart, I have 3 products, and that totaled what I can get for one product with another company.
Yeah. I mean, you can't grow mushrooms in the United States. There's just the amount of time it takes this is why, as Dr. Silver was describing these myceliated grain products, this is why they do it, is because it's not financially feasible to grow them in the U.S. And, I'm really proud of the fact that we grow in China. We've been, growing for over 30 years. Jeff Chilton set the benchmark, the standards for quality mushroom growing. And he identified, bad practices in the marketplace. Our mushrooms are tested before they leave China. They go through all kinds of testing. And then when they come to the United States, they get tested all over again. So I feel very comfortable. Like when I became mushroom obsessed, there was no other company that I wanted to go work for. I knew about the quality of Real Mushrooms and their parent company, Namex. And I feel very proud about our growing, how we grow our mushrooms.
That's why I joined this company about 2 years ago, same as Joni. Because of the reputation, and both Joni and I are used to working with very high-end companies, and we didn't want to go down. We wanted to go up with the next company,
Yeah. I mean, I worked with Kerry Bone. I mean, he's like, from MediHerb. I mean, he's the herbalist, and, he identified problems in the herbal industry, and he was such a whistleblower. And, I feel like Jeff Chilton, who is kind of owns our parent company. His son Sky runs Real Mushrooms. He, has really set the standard for quality mushrooms.
So I just have one other random question. Just going back to being a veterinarian in the 1980s, and you mentioned like Dr. Pitcairn's book, which of course I have a much later edition in the other room of, but what else was out there? I mean, I feel like it's very like groundbreaking, trailblazing to have been doing this and looking into anything integrative and alternative. It's a little more popular, these days, and there's so many more resources out there, but like, where do you even start back then when there's no internet and you're, and you have Dr. Pitcairn's book? Like, what else was there?
Well, it was tough, and the American Holistic Veterinary Medical Association only got itself established in 82 or 83. I'm an 82 graduate of Colorado State University, so I attended the first AHVMA meeting in 1988, and I felt like I was coming home. You go to these other, these conventional veterinary conferences, and everybody's pretty tight sphincter and uptight with ties and jackets and all the other crap you have to wear in that context. And here people were hugging each other and they were sharing, they were being non-competitive. It was such a lovely environment to be part of. And
is that Dr. Tincture?
Yes, Dr. Tincture.
He retired. His vet clinic was right up the street from me.
He's been a good friend and colleague for many years. He's an amazing guy. He's contributed so much to holistic veterinary medicine that I can't thank him enough. I see him. So yes, it was tough, and there weren't many books out there either. What I wound up doing was I started studying under human practitioners. I'm here in Boulder, Colorado. We've got acupuncture schools and acupuncturists, so I started learning here. We've also got a lot of herbal schools. So this is where I started learning from humans and then started to apply it to animals and then testing it in my clinic. Things that were successful, I kept. Things that weren't successful, I discarded. And so it was a trial and error process for many years and I thank you for acknowledging that because it has been a tough road. It's amazing to me now that there's so much interest in it. And when I speak to like holistic clubs for vet students, they all want to be, so many vet students now, they want to start out being a holistic practitioner. And I say, you need to be able to practice conventional medicine as well in order to know what it's an alternative to. And so, yeah, it's very rewarding to see how things are now.
I remember in 1996, Sojourner Farms, when I started raw feeding in 1996, Sojourner Farms is still out there. It was I think a British company that was imported. It was the only, It was the only raw food company out there back then. And now look at the marketplace.
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely astounding because I feel like when I started raw 10 years ago this month.
We both did. We both did 10 years ago. Yeah.
And I remember being so overwhelmed and it never occurred to me to do it myself. I was coming from kibble, so I was looking for a commercial raw. The stores I knew of were Petco and PetSmart, and they didn't really have anything. I think it was right before we started seeing freezers in those stores, probably even like a couple years before. And it was so much. And I had no idea that we had Darwin's Pet just down the road. And now, like a couple weeks ago, I wake up in the morning to something with Darwin's. I'm getting all these messages. So I text Gary and I'm like, what's going on, Gary? And it's like, he's a friend of mine now. And it's just like, I just love the changes. And when I just started on TikTok recently, so I'm trying to attract more African Americans because, this is a forgotten segment of the community. And so I'm talking to all of these people and we're all finding each other like, oh my God, you feed raw too. And it's just so much fun talking to each other and meeting people who have the same mindset that I did 10 years ago, didn't know that this was a thing, want to know more. And it's just like, it's so exciting just to start. And it's probably why I'm getting excited about my blogging again, because I have this whole new group of people who is like, oh, well, let me tell you the magics of all these things that I'm doing for my dogs and how easy it is. I mean, when I talk to people, if I get too excited, I can see them shut down. I can see them get overwhelmed because they think it's so hard. But it's like, it's really not hard to do these things because like medicinal mushrooms replace so many other supplements and so many medications. So I used to spend, when I first started feeding raw, it would literally take me 30 minutes to 45 minutes to get my dog's meals ready. Whereas now it's minutes, it's easy, it's not a big deal because I got rid of a lot of the supplements over the years and just I do CBD oil, I do medicinal mushrooms, and a few other things, and I'm pretty good to go.
I was one of the first vets to not just recommend raw diets, but I actually taught my clients. And this was because it was before we had those freezers in the pet stores. In fact, I had a freezer in my office where I sold Nature's Variety. And Nature's Variety actually came to my office because they had heard about my promoting raw diets and selling their stuff, and they hired me. So I was still a vet, but I worked for them part-time, working with their attorney when they would have claims, and I would review medical records and stuff. Now, I mean, it's so much easier, and there's so much information out there about doing homemade diets that I wouldn't have to spend that much time. I would just recommend it and refer them to a couple of good sites where they could learn a lot more, or they could just go to the pet store and buy stuff that's already made. I do want to make one little comment here. Maybe I shouldn't be even saying this stuff, but as a proponent of raw diets, and I've seen the benefits of them, I'd like to say that for some people, feeding raw is a bit of a scary thing. They're worried about foodborne pathogens and things like that. And some families aren't really, if they aren't really able to fix food for themselves, how well can they do that for their own animals? And animals undergoing chemotherapy, as with your dog with lymphoma, we worry about immune suppression. And I'd just like to say that I think there's a lot of value to raw. I think there's also a lot of value to just cooking it in kitchen temperatures. Sometimes that's the best way to go. Not every animal can deal with raw foods. I know we hear these incredible things, and kibble for years, always had diarrhea, losing weight, started them on the raw meaty bone diet, and been perfect ever since. And that's true, that does happen, but it's not for all animals. It's each animal really charts their own individual course when it comes to what foods are best for them and what way to prepare it is best for them as well.
Yeah, I always tell my followers to feed the dog in front of them.
Yes.
And someone told me that, and that was like the key that cracked it open for me and just made it just clear. Rodrigo, a year or so ago, he stopped eating raw. Oh. And he just wasn't interested. He would look at his dish and he would walk away. So I started cooking his food, and he ate that for a year. He ate a cooked diet. And a year later, he started eating raw again. But from that experience, I actually started warming my dog's food and because I was also learning more about, because of Scout, traditional Chinese medicine, and the holistic vet was like, I need you to stop feeding food out of the fridge. It needs to be room temperature. And that was what he wanted. He just, I don't speak dog. He doesn't speak human. So he just walked away from his meal.
In traditional Chinese medicine, raw food is very cold. And for humans, it's probably colder than for animals. But for many animals, it can be too cold. So that was really a great solution.
Yeah. I love that. Feed the dog in front of you. That's a great.
Yeah. It is. It's. I wish I remembered who told me. I have ideas of who told me, but it really, mostly it was helped me get out of my head, because again, when you're on social media, you have all these well-intentioned people giving you advice and sharing information, and it can get so overwhelming. And I actually created a meme about that the other day, where it's like, my head starts to explode because someone shared something. And I've learned to understand that with everything, there's moderation. And so nothing is black and white, and every dog is unique. And that is Apollo barking at something outside. But he's trying to bark quietly, so I appreciate it.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. We're so excited to have learned all this about mushrooms, because I think people are interested, but then they get confused or overwhelmed. And I think we were able to answer a lot of the questions that we get asked a lot today. So thank you so much for your time.
I can't believe how quickly it went, too.
I know,
Thank you for
right?
having us.
It always flies by. We can keep going, but I want to make sure you have time to get dinner.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. It's been great being here.